It was July 28, 2021, in Essex, Maryland, a quiet suburban community just east of Baltimore. The time was a little after 11 p.m. when an officer noticed a dark Nissan Versa weaving slightly between lanes. The car had fake temporary tags and no working rear lights, so the officer initiated a stop near Eastern Boulevard. Inside the car was 33-year-old Nicole Michelle Johnson. She looked calm, even casual, as she pulled over to the curb. Body camera footage shows her speaking softly, claiming she had borrowed the car from a friend. The officer asked for a license and registration, but Nicole didn't have either. She explained that her paperwork was messed up, and that she'd been trying to get her life together after some rough times. At first, it seemed like a routine citation. The officer noticed, however, that she kept glancing toward the back of her car, as if she was guarding it. A faint, strange odor drifted forward each time the car shifted. He ignored it at first, assuming it might be trash or spoiled food. But something about it didn't feel right. When the officer asked her to step out of the car, Nicole hesitated. "Why?" she asked quietly. The officer explained it was standard since she had no ID. As she stepped out, another patrol car pulled up for backup. The second officer, approaching from behind, wrinkled his nose. "Do you smell that?" he whispered. The first nodded. The odor was stronger now, foul and sour, impossible to mistake for anything ordinary. They asked Nicole what was in the trunk. She shrugged. "Just clothes, old stuff," she said. Her voice quivered. When they requested permission to open it, she refused. That denial raised immediate suspicion. Because she had fake tags and no license, they followed procedure to impound the vehicle. When told this, she protested. "You can't do that," she said quickly. "I need that car. Everything I own is in there." The officers began the inventory before towing. One of them, wearing gloves, walked to the rear and pressed the trunk button. The latch clicked open. A rush of hot air escaped, carrying the full stench of decay. Both officers stepped back, covering their faces. Inside the trunk were several black trash bags, wrapped tightly and covered by blankets. At first glance, it looked like old clothes. But as the officer shifted one bag, he froze. Beneath the folds of fabric was something small, shaped like a limb. He dropped the flap and stepped back, his hand trembling on the radio. "Dispatch," he said, voice shaking. "We have possible human remains." Nicole stood silently beside the car. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She looked down at the ground and whispered, "It's not what you think." Within minutes, more patrol cars arrived. She was handcuffed and seated on the curb. She kept muttering, "I didn't mean to," and "I was going to take care of it." Her words made no sense. Detectives were called. They secured the scene, cordoned off the area, and began documenting every inch of the vehicle. Inside the trunk, investigators found two small bodies wrapped in plastic and layers of trash. It was immediately clear that this was more than a concealment. It was a tragedy. Nicole was transported to the precinct for questioning, while the car was towed to headquarters for forensic processing. At the station, her story began to unfold in fragments. Nicole admitted that the bodies were those of her niece and nephew, 7-year-old Jocelyn Johnson and 5-year-old Larry O'Neill. Their mother, Nicole's sister Alicia, had left them in her care back in 2019. Nicole had been their guardian ever since. She told detectives that life had become impossible. Money was tight, housing was unstable, and she didn't know where to turn. At some point, one of the children had died. She said it was an accident, and in panic, she kept the body, afraid of being blamed. Then, she said, the other passed away later, and she did the same. Her story was inconsistent, broken by long silences. The detectives were stunned not only by what she described, but by how calmly she said it. Her voice rarely changed. She gave no timeline, no clear reason. She only repeated that she didn't know what else to do. Forensic experts examined the car and confirmed the unimaginable. The two children had been dead for well over a year. The heat, the wrapping, and the confined space had accelerated decomposition. Investigators later discovered that the children had not been enrolled in school or medical programs for more than 12 months. No welfare checks, no missing person reports. They had simply disappeared from the system. The next day, the story broke in local news. Bodies of 2 children found in vehicle trunk, the headlines read. The community was horrified. Parents held their own kids tighter that night, trying to understand how something like this could happen in their own neighborhood. The officers who found the remains were offered counseling. Their body cam footage was sealed as evidence, too distressing to release. Behind the headlines were people, officers, investigators, and family, who would never forget what they had seen. Days turned into weeks, and the case deepened. Investigators pieced together Nicole's life leading up to that night. She had grown up in Maryland, working low-income jobs, often moving from one small apartment to another. When her sister left the state for work, Nicole promised to care for the children temporarily. It was supposed to be a short arrangement, but months passed and no one followed up. Neighbors described her as quiet but distant. They remembered seeing her car filled with bags and clothes, sometimes parked for days without moving. Some thought she was homeless. Others thought she was just struggling through hard times. No one knew the truth about what was inside that trunk. When detectives checked Nicole's phone and social media records, they found long gaps in communication. Her sister had stopped hearing from her regularly around mid-2020. Texts that once came weekly became rare, then stopped altogether. When Alicia tried calling, Nicole made excuses, saying the kids were fine, they were just busy or staying with friends. The investigation showed that the deaths likely occurred around that time. One child became unresponsive one night. Nicole claimed she panicked. Rather than call for help, she froze. Out of fear of being arrested or blamed, she did nothing. The second child died later, though the exact circumstances remain uncertain. What is certain is that Nicole continued to live with the secret for months, maybe over a year. She drove that same car, slept in it, and carried on conversations with people while the unthinkable sat behind her. Investigators later said that if not for that random traffic stop, if not for the officer noticing a fake tag, the truth might have remained hidden even longer. A small administrative violation became the thread that unraveled everything. The state of Maryland began reviewing its child protection systems, questioning how 2 children could vanish for over a year without a report. Social workers and advocacy groups pointed out the cracks. Overworked case managers, pandemic disruptions, and communication failures between agencies. But for the families affected, the reforms came too late. Vigils were held near the children's former school. Small candles flickered beside framed photos, surrounded by flowers and stuffed animals. Strangers came to mourn children they had never met. She seemed normal, one neighbor said. You'd never think someone could live with that kind of secret. As the case moved to court, the public divided. Some saw Nicole as a monster. Others saw a broken woman who had lost control. Psychologists interviewed in the news describe her actions as a collapse, a spiral of guilt, fear, and mental illness compounded by isolation and poverty. Prosecutors charged her with first-degree child abuse resulting in death, failure to report the deaths, and transporting and concealing human remains. She initially pleaded not guilty, but as evidence mounted, she entered a plea deal acknowledging her role. In 2023, a Baltimore County judge sentenced her to decades in prison, with a portion suspended pending psychiatric evaluation. During sentencing, the judge's words captured the tragedy of it all. "You had every chance to ask for help," he said. "Every opportunity to speak up. But instead, you drove, carrying not only their bodies but the silence that followed." For the officers, the case changed how they approached every call. The department launched new training programs focusing on hidden trauma, domestic neglect, and unusual behavior during routine stops. One of the officers later said, "You never know what's behind a trunk or a smile." As months passed, the media cycle moved on, but the memory lingered. Reporters revisited the story occasionally, a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and the failures of social systems meant to protect children. Nicole's sister, Alicia, was left to face unimaginable grief. She attended every hearing, sometimes speaking softly about her children's memories, how they used to draw, sing, and laugh. She later started a small foundation in their names to raise awareness for child welfare checks and guardian support programs. For the city of Baltimore, the case became a haunting reminder of what can slip through the cracks. The story appeared on true crime documentaries and podcasts, often under the same chilling headline, "The Woman Who Drove for Months with a Secret in Her Trunk." In interviews, community members said it made them look at others differently, not with suspicion, but with concern. They learned that sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest pain. Years later, one of the responding officers reflected in an interview. He said that night taught him something profound, that evil isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides behind exhaustion, despair, and fear. He said, "When we opened that trunk, we didn't just find evidence. We found a tragedy that could have been prevented if someone had listened sooner." The story continues to echo as a warning. It's not just about one woman's crime, it's about all the moments where help could have arrived but didn't. About all the times someone could have noticed but chose to look away. Every true crime story leaves two legacies, one of loss and one of lessons. The woman who drove for months with a secret in her trunk didn't just take lives. She forced a community and a country to see what happens when neglect and silence collide. As the years pass, the road where the traffic stop occurred looks the same. Cars moving, lights flashing, life going on. But for those who remember, that stretch of asphalt holds a weight heavier than any vehicle. It reminds them that behind every ordinary night, every routine stop, and every faint odor someone ignores, there might be a story waiting to be told. One that begins quietly and ends with a truth no one ever expected to find.